So a few more things about chapter 2. A couple reflections questions for you as you finish that is, what do you think about the focus being on white men? And what's your reaction to that? Are you okay with that? What gets in the way of that? Is it some fears, worries? And so getting a little used to having that part of yourself examined, just create a little space for yourself. But notice what comes up when that happens, when you're doing that. And try not to let assumptions that you're broken or wrong or something get in the way of that. And then this mindset that I presented at the end of that chapter 2 is, life is not just a problem to solve, it's also a journey. So you could ask yourself, to what degree do I approach life from a problem-solving mindset? And what degree do I approach diversity from a problem-solving mindset? If you do that, you're probably going to be frustrated because you're going to be like, okay, what's the problem I'm trying to fix? Let's nail it down exactly. And it's not really definable. It's one of these issues where the more you study the issues around diversity, the more questions you have, not the less questions, and the more confusing it gets and the more complex it gets. So a problem-solving mindset tends to want to have a finish point as opposed to diverging into more questions and more confusion. So holding up some of that as a question of a problem and another part as a journey. This is a lifelong journey. I'm going to keep going until the day I die learning about diversity stuff. Maybe I've got some stuff figured out about race, but transgender is brand new to me, however that is. So allow yourself to think of it as a journey, and allow yourself to see other white men as on a journey too. And you're sharing your journey, and your questions and your confusions can provoke them to be reflective too. And this also is about, there's not a right way, there's not a right view. And so you're sharing your perspective, your journey is something that's unarguable and therefore more helpful than preaching at other white men what you think they should know. The last thing I want to say about chapter 2 is, in that chapter, the lights go out all of a sudden. Well, that actually did happen in our first Shell internal caucus in that setting at Chain of Lakes Resort. And it was just an hour into the session. And we were literally sitting in a circle of rocking chairs with no windows. And apparently a train went by and a tree was knocked over enough to knock out a light pole or something. And all the electricity went out immediately. And we were in pitch black. We were still just rocking. And the guy's kind of like, yeah, you planned this, didn't you? It's like, eventually a waitress comes into the room with candles and she hands out. So then we're all sitting in rocking chairs with candles, holding candles, which somebody said, are we going to sing Kumbaya now? We ended up doing some of the walk, talk, and we re-met in the dining room where there was a little light from outside. But, everything in the book happened. So that was just one I wanted to mention. So I want to talk a little bit about chapter 3. In chapter 3 is that next morning, and one of the things Joe, the character, says is, aren't we just perpetuating stereotypes when we talk about white men? And he has a point there that there's a fear and a danger of us assuming white men are all the same, and that we're just we're stereotyping us. Well, we're not used to having our white maleness examined, and so we're more likely going to be in touch with the fear of it than actually the insights of what it actually can create for us. It is a fact that we are white men, and yet no two white men are the same. And so we are looking at insights from that part of our lives where we haven't looked before typically, and we can also manage the complexity of not assuming all white guys have the same experience. So sit with that and notice that. I mentioned in there 3 questions that show up in everybody in groups, which is from Marvin Weisberg's book, Productive Workplaces. And he derived it from Phiro B. And, am I in or out? Do I have a voice and influence? And am I appreciated for my skills and resources? And everybody has those questions up in groups. And what differences make a difference in order for that to happen? So for some people, they may not feel in or out or have a voice because they're introverted. And somebody else might feel like they're in HR role versus the engineering role in an engineering dominated firm, and they're more of an outsider. So these three questions are questions about inclusion that can be triggered by any difference that makes a difference for people. So we're looking at these things, particularly race, particularly gender and sexual orientation, so that we can examine being white and male, and for many heterosexual, but we're not limiting it to that. By all means, take both a broad view of diversity and make sure we're looking at these elements that many of us as white guys haven't looked at before. So do the both andness of that. Well, one way to lean into the white maleness is to, just as we did in that book, just do a free association. What comes up for you when you hear the words white men? And, can't dance, can't jump might be some of the things that come up for people, but some people think of founding fathers, some people think of golf, Congress, corporate leaders. Some people think of the Aryan Nation or the KKK. And, it's helpful to actually notice all that and notice how much of a broad, extreme variance it is amongst those different associations for our group. And I don't attach myself to all those things. I don't connect myself to all those things. So why would I want to see myself as a white male if it's just a lot of stuff I don't want to associate myself with? So I might be more inclined to even say more, I'm Michael. I'm not a white male. And that's partly because we don't attribute ourselves to everything in that group. And yet we need to know that other people do. Other people do see us as part of that group, and they can connect different things in that group to us. We're not used to having that happen to us because we're like the norm, that happens to other groups that are more minority groups. And yet, to really take that on and think about it. So the next question you can ask when you add on to the words white men, diversity. What assumptions come up for people? And we did a little bit of that in that chapter 3. And, people assume white men are the problem. People assume we don't care about diversity, or we're only doing it because we have to. And, or we're doing it to look good and we want to, do that. And other assumptions about us are that, we have to be forced to do it, that we can't get it. We'll never understand what other people's experience are. And, those actually get in the way, whether we hold them or others hold them about us, of us getting more clear and engaging deeper in diversity. And, another assumption is that people assume white men are all the same. So if you can ask yourself, if people are assuming we're all the same, if we're assuming we don't care about diversity, we're only doing it because we're forced to, and that we'll never be able to get it, or they assume we're the problem, what do you think the implications are, or the impact of those assumptions are in your partnerships at work? And a lot of those things, when I think about them, and the men did that in the chapter a little bit, is, we're walking on eggshells. We are afraid to make more mistakes because we're going to get fired or hauled off to HR or seen as anti-diversity if we speak up and share some of our confusions. Others may not trust us because, we're sort of hanging back and hiding and not showing up authentically in a way that shows our humility and humbleness and our hunger to learn. So they just, again, project those assumptions onto our intent. They don't care. They don't want to learn. They'll only do it if they're forced to. Others have work to do around re-examining those assumptions. So we have work to do too around examining, getting through that and re-examining some of those assumptions that we take in ourselves too. We do need to examine, how can we overcome this negative credibility that we have about diversity? People assume we don't understand, don't get it. You individually have to demonstrate credibility to overcome that. And that can take effort, particularly if you're trying to avoid any mistakes, because you're going to make mistakes. So the thing I would want to say about this, and it's the mindset at the end of chapter 3, is, my view of the world isn't wrong. More likely it's incomplete. Try not to get triggered by hearing others say your perspective is wrong, and hear it as you're not seeing part of it. And so everything I see is likely really valid and incomplete picture of the whole. So I need to be curious more about what parts am I not seeing that others see. One way to do that is to think about this concept of paradoxes, which is what we introduced in chapter 4, these 4 paradoxes. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about those. The first paradox is individual group. And so you could say, yes, I am an individual. I'm not like any other white guy on the planet. I'm totally unique, which you are. And I am part of this group, being white and being male. And that gives me a different experience in the world in general than other people of color, other women being women experience. And so I need to understand what about that gives me a more unique experience in the world. So the second paradox that I want to talk about is what we call sameness and difference. Sameness is, the lens at which you can look through the world and say, we're all the same. You might say, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I just quote unquote treat everybody the same. There's a reality to that, all of us being human. And the other side of that is difference. And so, can I see difference? Can I see color? Can I see gender? Can I see other differences that are out there in the world? And sometimes people think of this as an either or. Well, do you want me to see your color? Do you want me to see your gender or not? And so how can I, as a leader, as somebody said, be color conscious and color blind at the same time? How can I manage this paradox of sameness and difference? It's really important. It's very natural, and our human tendency is to want to connect on commonality and look for things we have in common with people. And when it comes around diversity, often people want their differences known. They want to be seen for their differences. So managing sameness and difference is a really important one. And to know that if I hang out on the sameness side of things, I need to walk over to the other side and look at through the difference lens and acknowledge that. If I stay on the sameness side, I might, of course, think all lives matter. Because all lives matter. It's all human lives matter. All lives matter. And yet, if I go over to the different side, I'm going to actually see, wow, it looks like the way blacks are treated, that blacks' lives don't matter. And so I'm going to be willing to say black lives matter to counteract what I see on television or what I see in police brutality and other kinds of things. So it's all lives matter and it's black lives matter. But if I can't say Black Lives Matter, chances are I'm just hanging out on the sameness side of that sameness difference paradox. And it's very important for me to be able to say both and speak to both. And it makes me a better diversity partner. So notice the sameness and notice the difference. And notice which side you're biased to stay on. For white men, we tend to think of ourselves through an individual lens. So individual group, we look through individual lens and we think through sameness. And so we're missing part of the world. Our worldview isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. The third paradox, what we call challenge and support. If you think about the most powerful mentors in your life, chances are they didn't just support you, they just really challenged you as well. So the third paradox that I want to speak about is support and challenge. And, to have relationships across difference thrive, we need to be able to support each other and challenge each other. And we actually need to do that with each other as white men too. If you think about the most powerful mentors in your life, chances are they really supported you and they really challenged you. And so sometimes even in the same breath. So how can we love each other and support each other and challenge each other to be at our best? Mark Chesler, one of my mentors, said, the only way to touch other white men is through love. It was a few years after that he and I were working together, and he said, I meant the Jewish definition of love, which incorporates just, support, but also challenge, as opposed to what he saw as the Christian definition of love, which is more of an unconditional support. So that it's coming from a place of love, and it's challenge along with support. And so I want you to point out my blind spots as a white male colleague, and I want you to do that for me. We want to do that for each other. So that kind of relationship where we support each other's learning and stretching. So the fourth paradox is one that we added in a really intense lab caucus once, working for a power company, where the guys were talking about how they felt blamed for everything around diversity, and people of color were playing the race card. And we said, how many people are you talking about? They said, just 2 or 3. And, it was interesting that they fixated on a few people who were quote unquote playing the race card. There's ways that we play the white race card, I think, all the time. And I think one of them is through just seeing the individual lens, focusing on sameness and not being able to see other people's differences and stuff. So seeing this last paradox of it's not my fault and I'm responsible. I don't have to apologize for something I didn't do, and I'm responsible for looking out for how do these differences play out in society today, and what do I not have to deal with that my colleagues of color or women or others are dealing with on a daily basis. How can I intervene using my privilege honorably? So that's the responsible side. But notice if I feel like somebody's talking to me at an individual lens, and they may be talking about white men, because I look through the individual lens, I take everything personally, and I get triggered, and I get into the not my fault, and I'm defending my good guyness, that I'm a good guy, I have good intent. Well, I need to recognize at that individual group level when somebody's talking to me as a part of a group and when somebody's talking to me as an individual. So that's a tool to use right now. And I watched a police officer talk about his learnings from his caucuses, and he came back and he realized, I don't have to react to people who are just looking at me and making assumptions because they don't know me at an individual level. And he got into more curiosity, and that was a powerful shift for him. I would like to suggest that, the desire to say it's not my fault is about intent and protecting my intent and that I'm a good guy, versus I'm responsible is about shifting over to saying, how did I just impact you? So if somebody is offended by me, I can either say I have good intent and defend myself, or I can go, how did I just impact you? And turn that moment into a powerful partnership bridge. So that's some of the tools of the paradoxes: individual, group, sameness, difference, support, challenge, not my fault, I'm responsible. So when I have you think about these and use them as a reflection tool, which ones do you tend to use more? Which side of those paradoxes? Which of these paradoxes is hardest for you to manage and you need to lean into it more with muscles? And what might be the next step for you around that? So that's the paradox. And the broader sense of paradoxes is really thinking in a both and. And so this mindset shift that we have in this chapter 4 is about, seeing the world through multiple perspectives rather than one right view. So we have sameness and difference, colorblind, color conscious. Let's look at both of those. They may seem contradictory to each other, but they each illuminate a fuller perspective. So it's yes and yes. And that's a powerful, powerful tool. I think some of white male culture in that low tolerance of uncertainty tends to have us think of an either or terms. Black, white, is it this or that? You're either with us or against us. And so how can I see the gray area, the complexity, and this tool of yes, both yes and, both and for paradox is a really good tool for that, for us to get out of that dichotomous logic. And sometimes see the world through the way other people see it, which is not using that dichotomous logic.